This workshop, this experts workshop is very important. It comes at a very right time when the committee has just passed the general comment on online sexual exploitation of children. It comes at a time when the committee has country rapporteurs that deal with some of the countries identified in the report on aspects of sexual exploitation. It comes at a correct time when we have thematic rapporteurs on sexual exploitation, rapporteurs on harmful practices. So it's very important. Some of the lessons, some of the takeaways that I pick, yes, there are some countries where the study was not taken, but they identify the same challenges that were identified in the other countries where the study was taken. So the question is, how do we propagate? How do we copy without pasting? But how do we take lessons from the countries where the study was done, the findings, and run with the recommendations in those other countries? Countries, I would not want to mention the names, but countries which still have issues with movement of children, which have movement in terms of migrants, in terms of migrants, in terms of children fleeing from conflict. Usually, online sexual exploitation can cover any range of children because they are all vulnerable. So one lesson is how to get those findings and use them elsewhere in terms of recommendations. And secondly, how to disseminate the various studies. Studies have been carried out across various countries, but how do we ensure that children who are affected can benefit from the recommendations? Countries where this study has been done can benefit from the recommendations. Having one large book, which is, let's say, 100 pages, it's good, but how do we ensure that a parliamentarian can read it, a minister can read it, children can read it? How do we ensure that it's in different other languages? And also to learn that with this problem of online sexual exploitation, children are not the same, they're not homogeneous. You still have to deal with them in light of the other vulnerabilities that they present. Is it exploitation and other vulnerabilities? I think having a dual approach to the problem and solution is very instructive. The first step is to bridge the gap between the continent and the specific countries. And CSOs come in very handy in doing this, to engage regional economic communities, to engage regional mechanisms. Because if from the committee we are working, if from the African Union we are working downwards, and countries from the bottom are working upwards, there is that place of confluence in the middle where the common denominator is the CSOs, most of which have attended the workshop. They have to run with this message to ensure that they bring in regional economic communities and regional mechanisms. I think we should have some kind of monitoring and evaluation process where we are able to identify the specific recommendation, what are the milestones towards the achievement of that recommendation, how do we engage governments, how do we ensure that this is part of the national plan, how do we engage CSOs, how do we ensure that they work in a complementary measure with government, how do we engage the committee, how do we take steps to ensure that yes, we have a general comment, we have this study, how do we work together? I believe the different strengths that we bring on board, both in a horizontal and vertical axis, we should be able to speak to various ways of not only measuring progress, but seeing actual progress being done in terms of the recommendations that are identified in the report. Some of the changes that I expect to see should be in terms of legislative reform from countries that speaks to the challenges of online sex exploitation. Policy reform, because at times if you don't have a policy, you cannot have legislative reform, where governments take on policy documents, take on cabinet decisions to inform the legislative processes. Not only that, administrative reforms, where we have persons who are entrusted with the obligations to ensure that online sexual exploitation is dealt with not only in the national perspective, but more so in the regional perspective. For instance, if Kenya has a different law and Uganda has a different law, someone might take advantage. But if they have laws that speak to each other, a person will still be brought to account regardless of where he commits the offense with regard to online sexual exploitation. The other thing is, at times there are higher echelons that inform these unfortunate processes. How do we deal with a problem other than the symptom? At times we deal with the symptom of the problem, but how do we deal with the problem? What are the causes? What are the drivers? Who are the persons behind this? Once we deal with that, we are not only dealing with the problem, but also attaching a preventive aspect to the problem. So in the next 10 years, I foresee use of more prevention initiatives in dealing with the problem as well. My final remark, in Africa, we say it takes a community to raise a child. It takes a community to keep a child. It takes a community to protect a child. Let's protect these children. Once we do, then we shall have an Africa fit for our children and children fit for Africa.